Executive Director of Barton, Kansas Historical Society.
I'm very pleased to be here, and you're going to have to bear with me because I'm not a historian, and I never argue with the historians. I found out it doesn't pay at all. But when we first talked with Deidre about Christmas on the Prairie, and we talked about the pioneer years, I sort of had this epiphany, and I thought, well, we're really not talking about Little House on the Prairie and Pa and all those things, because it didn't start out that way. At the end of the Civil War, and you remember that from our history books, at the end of the Civil War, other than just a little smattering of people along the east coast of Kansas, this whole area out here was just a vast sea of grass. Not much was out here, and hardly any people were here. If there had been people here, they were explorers. Some were trappers, but not so much through this area. And also a few people would come and go on the Santa Fe Trail, and that also was not like a John Wayne movie. The Santa Fe Trail was a road of commerce, and it sometimes stretched 2 miles wide, because if there was a puddle here and a rock there, you know, I thought the Santa Fe Trail was a two-lane highway. I know it is, but it wasn't. So those first people that came out here for only really one reason: land, land, land. You know, we have to sort of get that into our DNA. We think, you know, land. But you have to understand that in Europe, there was no land to be had. And people wanting to start a new life have two incentives to do that. One was, after the Civil War, the Homestead Act said if you wanted to come out here and squat on a piece of land, and you could hold it down for, was it 2 years, I think, then it could become yours. And the other one was when the railroads came. This was late 1870s, when the railroads started to come through. The railroads weren't too dumb. They thought, you know what, if we get more people out here, then we're going to be successful. So they also kind of checkerboarded the land adjacent to the railroads, and those plots were cheap. And so if you wanted cheap land, you could come to Kansas and eventually on west to establish a homestead. And boy, wasn't that fun. Boy, wasn't that fun. We actually have a little house on the prairie at the Barton County Historical Society. But I'll have to give you a little background on that. Mr. E.J. Dodge in the 70s, probably early 70s, took a train from Wisconsin to Ellsworth, and then he walked down here. He walked down here. Now, as you drive into town, if you're going to go back to Great Bend, and you're driving on the College Road, and you see the little bridge there where you cross the Walnut Creek, that's where Mr. Dodge established his homestead. When he walked down here, he built something for his family. It was a dugout, but it's a really nice dugout. It had 2 windows and a door. 2 windows and a door. Now that was pretty fancy dugout, you know. And then he sent for his family, and they came 7 children and 1 mother in 2 wagons. And they moved into that dugout until they built what we now have at the historic little house on the prairie. It's a 2-room stone house that was built by the Dodge family after or in addition to the dugout. So that's the beginning of the story about Christmas on the prairie. When people first came here, they didn't have things. They had the necessities that it would take to sustain them, they hoped, until they could build a little better life. I'm going to read a little something. This was not from this county, but it was from Reno County. You all know that's from Hutchinson. Julia and Barton Hand were among the first settlers in Salt Creek Township of Reno County. Julia wrote in her diary on December 25th, 1872, "A lonely Christmas to us. No Santa Claus comes here. I pop some corn and boil some molasses candy for the babies." That was Christmas. The following year, she said it was a whole lot better because she actually got a set of dominoes, and I mean, if Mom got something, it was really, really good.
We're good.
So these first enterprising, determined settlers that came out here did not really have things. The things that they had, if there were any presents to be given, of course they were handmade, and they were necessities. If you got a pair of mittens, if you got a scarf, if you got a piece of clothing, if you received anything, and maybe a little boiled molasses, boy, doesn't that sound good. You know, you were very, very fortunate. And they came out here, and they also had grasshopper plagues, and pretty soon they had dust storms, and you know, they were overrun with jackrabbits, and it was just really not easy to live out here. But as people continued to settle, then of course towns began to be formed, and Great Bend and Ellenwood were incorporated in 1876, but they've been sort of building them. They had to get enough population to say we're a real town, you see. So by the time the towns were coming along, there was a general store, and you could probably find a few more trade goods here and there. So Christmas could become a little more elaborate. But what did all of those people, what did they bring with them? Because they couldn't bring things. They brought their own traditions and their own customs and their own thoughts about holidays, their religious beliefs, and just things that were part of their lives in the past. And I think that, I know in our family, I think that a lot of those traditions still live on with us to this day. We don't think about it so much because we just do what we've always been doing. But even the time you celebrate Christmas, and if Santa comes, does he come at night or in the morning, and how does he come, and what does he do? But it isn't just Santa, it's what are the traditions of the various churches that came. Because remember, land, we're back to land. And so we had many, many kinds of settlers that came here to live. The most prevalent example, I think, is probably Ellenwood, which was all German speaking in the earlier days. And it all seemed to be settled by people who came from an area that they called Bavaria, and then Austria, and now it's Czechoslovakia. You know how these things come and go. But they all seem to come from that region. And we know about the Volga Germans up north, And we know the Mennonite communities, for instance, a lot of these people came because somebody had come before them. And with them, they brought those traditions and those foods and those kinds of celebrations. And so I think that we all somehow are carrying some of those right here with us to this day, whether we remember it from the past or not. My husband's family from Ellenwood, you know, German speaking in the beginning, and we still celebrate the holidays with special foods and special traditions that came from then. My family started somewhere so early that I don't even know what their traditions were. It was so long ago. But those are the kinds of things I think that we have carried down with us. And the little house on the prairie is fun, and it was good for our kids and our grandkids, whoever, to watch. And it's a good thing to remember too, but it's also to remember the sacrifice that people came here to settle Kansas and to establish homes, build houses, and build communities. When I read about some of these things that some of the early people did, not just the boiling molasses, but, you know, it makes me think we do not even understand how very fortunate we are with our excesses and our easy living. It is easy living out here now. So I told you a little bit about some of our traditions in our family. Who else has something that you know came from the past? None? Oh, come on. Norma, do you not remember something that your family did? Huh?
My mother's family came from Bohemia.
Yes.
And I know they celebrated.
Yes.
That's about all I know about it.
Oh my. Well, all right. After the towns got established and people had more luxury, shall we say, they had a real house, because you know that dugout then became the two-room stone house that we have out there now. And that family with 8 children and 2 parents somehow lived in and around that two-room house. And it's just about big enough for 3 people to stand inside. I always have the children come out there and I say, let's have 8 children in here. And if there's a guy, I say, come on in here with me. And then we stand and we say, okay, this is the size of the family that lived here. But when towns got established and people got a little better put together on their feet, then we began to have other kinds of celebrations, and Christmas then became whatever it was that you meant it to be. And I have brought with me today, for your pleasure, the very first artificial Christmas tree, because we think we see them all the time. This one originated in Germany, and I don't know if this one was made here or whether it was imported here. You know what this is, don't you? It's a feather tree, okay? Feather trees originated in Germany, and when we first moved back out here to the Midwest, every once in a while at an auction you would see a feather tree, but now they become very collectible. And Charlie Brown would be really pleased because they're terribly expensive. This poor guy has lost a lot of his or her goose feathers. This is a wire base, and they dyed goose feathers and put these goose feathers on this tree. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she beautiful? So,
Just enough room for a box of Dominoes and some.
that's exactly, yes. So, the next thing they did was they would light Christmas trees with real candles. Now, this came to us, and I don't know if it's real or if it's a replica or whatever, but this, of course, is a candle for a Christmas tree, whether it's artificial or not. And doesn't that just scare you to death? It scares me to death because I think, what kind of fires do they have to put out? Yeah. And then if they had popcorn, they would pop popcorn, or if they made, you know, everybody used to make paper chains, and the kids still do that, so there were paper chains, and look here, somebody put 3 little bulbs together. So I'm decorating for you. I want you to really appreciate this. Yeah, see? And, you know, there might be something that you could put on the top. But most of the things that a lot of the things were homemade ornaments too. And with the traditional German Christmas tree, other people, you know, the other thing out here on the prairie was, even if you had room in your 2-room house, what kind of a Christmas tree could you put up? Because where were the 8 children staying? I don't know. So, but there were just a few native conifers out here. A lady told me that had grown up in Dodge City that there weren't any, quote, green trees out there, and so they decorated a twig. And that's another thing that can be done, you know, but here we are. You see, we came from origins elsewhere, and so we tend to keep those things in our minds, in the backs of our minds, and with our traditions, and continue to build life the way we remember that it might be in more luxurious times. So this actually is the first kind of artificial tree, and it doesn't take up near as much room as those. How many of you have drug in a kind of tree that you said, but where are the people supposed to be in this living? We did that a couple of times, you know. Oh, it's huge, it's huge. We have traditions in our family. We braided bread on Christmas Eve. It's 3 braids, and if I'm really lucky, I could keep them from falling over, and you know, sometimes they look better than others. And anise cookies, because my husband's family were from Bavaria, and some other thing, and we fasted on Christmas Eve day too. And I think that would probably depend on religious preferences and religious observances for when you eat, when you don't eat, and what you eat. I'm sure that that's true. And I suspect that all of us in our DNA have some of those early things. Now, that's really about what I have to tell you, but I was hoping that somebody would join in and say what other kinds of traditions are prevalent around here. You know, Ellenwood's doing a really good thing. They're beginning to really emphasize their German background, and they're having all kinds of celebrations over there now that is that is admirable thing, and they're getting back to their roots. That's what ladies and gentlemen, will bring tourists in here to come and see what we have. So, Dottie, do you have a Christmas tradition? Dottie? And yeah, I'm picking on the people I know.
Well, I don't remember that we had specific things, but one of the things that was an education to me was when I joined the Keenan family. I didn't know very many of them the first Christmas, and I was very anxious about what I was supposed to do because I didn't know hardly anyone. Well, we drove in the driveway and there were cars as far as you could see. It was a farm. And I said, why are all these cars here? And he said, oh, it's just the family. I wanted too, so that was out of my bailiwick. But anyway, the dining room table was covered with food. I could see we weren't going to sit down to the table, but at any rate, pretty soon, grandmother said, Granddad will pray and then we'll eat. So he said the prayer, and all the men got up and went to the table. When they got through eating, we carried the dishes into the kitchen, and the mothers took the little kids and got their food and got them situated. And we did the dishes. And when the children got through and we cleaned that up, then we ate. It was about 2 o'clock. And so we washed dishes again. And, the afternoon was almost gone. And the men came in from out in the shed, where I'm sure they had more than Kool-Aid out there. And they ate again, and we did the dishes. And then the kids got up from their nap, and they did the dishes again.
Glad people, yeah.
And that night, then we had supper and did the dishes. And my boss, who knew that I was really anxious about this day I was going to be at the farm, because I knew that there would be many more people than I knew, he said, did you have a good time? I looked at him and I said, hell no. I said, well, I wash dishes.
That was a tradition with, yes,
Many
what
laughs over that. And I found out, the longer I was in the family, I found out that happened to almost everybody that came into the home, because no one was used to that many people. Oh, and Grandma said, you don't have a very good crowd. I said, how many do you think are here? And she said, oh, not more than 40. 40? I said, well, how many would you usually have? And she said, almost always at least 60.
Oh my goodness,
Oh,
think of
my,
all
my,
those
we
dishes.
have
Yeah.
4 times I washed dishes.
And how many children? 13 children in that?
10, there were 10 children in the original family, and then when he remarried, she brought 5, and then they had 2, and they had an uncle who lived with them all the years. So
Uncle Johnny.
Uncle Johnny lived there. I didn't ever get to know Uncle Johnny or those people.
And for instance, the Dodge family, we do have some, one of his sons wrote articles for the newspaper, and that's why we know quite a bit about the Dodge family that homesteaded out here. There were 2 other families that came before the Dodge family, and our researcher, says, I want to always be accurate. And I said, yeah, but I'm talking about Little House on the Prairie. So I'm not going to talk about all of them. But they were among the first settlers. And some of the thing, and they had 8 children too. And they had 7 when they came out. 1 died, and they acquired 1 more, and so it was still 8. But some of the excerpts from those early years is, it was a joyous occasion if they were able to shoot any kind of an edible thing, bird or beast, because that meant they could have food. And I'll backtrack a little bit. I have been told that in order to start a town, you needed a blacksmith, and you needed a mill if possible. Okay, those two things before anything else, You had to have that blacksmith because there was no hardware store, you know. And I mean, it was just make do, make do, make do. Now, after those things, then churches started to spring up and general stores and schools. And schools were really important. They were really very important, not just in town, but Barton County, for instance, at one time had 105 one-room schools in this county alone. Why? Wasn't much transportation, and so a homesteader or a farmer would say, dedicate a little plot of his land, help a school be built so his children could attend school, and all the other children surrounding the area. But here's the thing about that school that we don't think about. There weren't any other public buildings, or very many, and so that one-room school became kind of a gathering place for people. There's an article that I've read about the very first Christmas tree in Ellenwood. I have to tell you, it's a little bit exaggerated because they found this magnificent green tree, and they did decorate it with homemade things, you see. But it was this magnificent tree, and choirs sang, and people spoke, and I said, where'd they get all those people, and how big was that school? Well, it really wasn't as big as this article said it could be. And the tree was also decorated with nuts and fruits and candies and mittens and all these things, and I thought, and somebody did say after the grasshopper year, and that would have been the truth, because, you know, everybody hauled themselves out here in a wagon, and the first thing that happened was the grasshopper said, what are you interlopers? We're eating everything. Everything is ours. So